rewatch or to share to anyone that maybe couldn't be here today. It'll be available on our website shortly after this program concludes. And of course, as well, many of you have shared that your favorite part of these programs are being able to ask our guests questions and to interact. So please, as the program is happening, please feel free to type any questions that you have into the chat box, and I will relay them to our guests. Towards the end, they're going to answer as many questions as they possibly can. And I already see somebody in the chat saying the film was amazing in all capital letters. So I wanted you all to hear that as we get started. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you the director, our filmmaker of Children of the Inquisition, Joe Lovett. Joe is the director of Children of the Inquisition, which is a subject that he's been very interested in since childhood. Joe was a groundbreaking broadcast journalist working at CBS News, as well as ABC's 2020, where he produced the first news story about the US government's inaction on the AIDS crisis. Among others, Joe won a Peabody Award and was nominated for an Emmy for his HBO documentary, Cancer, Evolution to Revolution. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Joe Lovett.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And thank you to everybody at the Holocaust Center. And thank you so much to Hanson Munford and everybody at the Orlando Museum of Art for their support and encouragement on this project. It's really a pleasure, and I understand that people wanted to know how I got into this film. It's for those of you who've actually seen it. We discuss it a bit in the film. When I was 13, our rabbi went on sabbatical and asked me to put up my bar mitzvah. And I was happy to do that because I adored my rabbi and wanted him to bar mitzvah me. And I paid attention to what he was doing. And one of the things that he was doing on sabbatical was trying to do a study on the descendants of the people who had converted, the Jewish families that had converted during the Spanish Inquisition. And he came back and he gave this incredible sermon that stuck with me forever. And he called it Todos Católicos, everybody's Catholic. And he said that no one would even consider having a drop of Jewish blood, no one that he spoke to. This was 1958. It was just after the Holocaust when it was a little dicey to be Jewish, to be sure. And it was before Vatican II, when Pope John XXIII exculpated the Jews for the death of Jesus in 1965. So a lot has changed since then, and but I was always fascinated by this concept that something that happened so very long ago, at least to a 13-year-old in 1958, it seems so long ago, that it could still have an effect on people today. Nowadays, with people living to be 100 years, living to be 100 years, we realize that 100 years, 500 years is really just 5 lifetimes. So that's pretty amazing when you think of it, how things have changed. But when in 1992, with the celebration of Columbus's coming to the New World, in Spain, there was a lot of hubbub about, of course, the cinquecentennial, but there was also a lot of discussion about what else happened the same week that Columbus left, and that was that the edict of expulsion had gone into effect, and the Jews were leaving the harbors at the same time that that Columbus's ships were. And so there were a lot of articles in the Spanish press and the Portuguese press at that time, both print media and television media, about this long-held secret or long ignored secret of Jewish ancestry among the people. And so people who perhaps might have been the grandchildren of my rabbi, of the people my rabbi was trying to interview, who said, no, todos católicos, their grandchildren might have said in 1992, well, isn't that interesting? I wonder if that's why no one in our family ever goes to church, or I wonder if that's why my grandfather refused the last rites, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what had become forbidden for many people became rather interesting and maybe even sort of glamorous in a dark sort of way. So, but there's been a great deal more study on this that's been going on, and I've been very fortunate to have the Society for Crypto-Judaic Studies, which is a national organization, academic organization. They've been wonderful in helping me and introduce me to people, and it's a great resource for people. That's the Society for Crypto-Judaic Studies, and you can get in touch with them. Another person, I want to get this out of the way early, is Jeannie Milgram, who is a huge resource in terms of finding out your background. And her website is www.jeannie, G-E-N-I-E, Milgram, ILGROM.info. And she has databases that you could refer to and all sorts of things. So that's my story. I don't, as far as I had thought, I had no Sephardic background. But then when I started, but obviously I became that much more curious and started looking around, and depending upon what day you check my DNA, I do seem to be descended from the first convert in a certain line of Jews who lived in Spain about maybe 1400 or more years ago, whose family then immigrated to Poland. I think one thing that we've discovered in looking at all of this is that, or I've discovered, is that these divisions of Ashkenazi and Sephardic are sort of silly because it's really just a matter of who traveled where when, but so many people are related and in so many ways. But I'd just like to open it up to our panelists who are so wonderful to have come. Is Carlos here yet? Did we notice? No, okay. So we have Doreen Carvajal, who is an American living in Paris and has been an extraordinary help to this film. She's just been wonderful. We spent a great deal of time together, both in Spain and in France and in the United States. And then Ruth Henriques, who actually Anna is sort of my key into all of this. I was at a cocktail party years ago in New York, and I was talking to this guy, and he said, "Oh, what do you think of doing next?" And I said, "Oh, I'm thinking of doing something about the Inquisition and the Jews and the people descended from the converted Jews." And he said, "Oh my God!" He said, "Well, you've got to speak to my friend Anna. Her father is the linchpin on all this. He knows everything." And that was before I even started. And then luckily we all came together, and they welcomed us to Jamaica and to Anna's daughter's bat mitzvah, and which you all saw in the film. So well, let's start with Doreen. Doreen, how has this experience changed you? If you want to talk a little bit about your background and what your journey has been to date.
Well, just to sum up quickly, because I'm assuming people saw quite a bit of that in the film, but basically I was raised Catholic, 6 kids, a parochial school, fish on Friday, Sunday Mass. And then since I grew up, I was a reporter, and people started noticing my byline. Carvajal. And for those people who wonder about where to start when you're looking at your genealogy, look at your own name. What does it mean? And in my name, Carvajal, I didn't pay attention. And In some versions, it means lost place. And I think that's the story of my journey, lost place. As people started to look at my byline, particularly in the Philadelphia Inquirer, where I worked for years, and the New York Times, where I also worked for years, and just reporting in the field, the first time I became aware of my name and where it came from, and by the way, my father's from Costa Rica, I knew that, but I didn't know any of this other background. A rabbi at a synagogue in Philadelphia said to me while reporting a story, do you know that your name is a Sephardic Jewish name from the Iberian Peninsula? And I said, no. And it meant nothing to me. It was totally out of context. I didn't think much about it, but it was almost as if someone was trying to send me a message, because on different stories, people would come back to me and say, do you know your name? Do you know where that comes from? This is where it comes from. Someone from Israel wrote to me while I was in the New York Times and asked me, are you related to such and such a Carvajal from Israel? And so it started pulling me. And when I moved to Europe after September 11th to ultimately work for the New York Times and the International Herald Tribune, like many people in middle age, you have the time, you start to look at where you came from. And that's when I started investigating my own family. And essentially, I started with what I knew. My father had prepared a book going back a few generations. And I started with that and built from that, and benefited from the fact that there's so much more information online. Every year, there's more and more information online through My Heritage or Ancestry.com or Family Search. The ability to find original documents, birth certificates, baptismal certificates, all of that helped. And, just to answer your last question, I mean, how did it affect me? I was already a very secular Catholic at that point. I mean, really wasn't practicing anything. And what it did was kind of shifted my identity, and I think helped me to become more spiritual in a way. I belong now to a spiritual community. It's called Hineni. It's run by a rabbi out of Orange County, California. It's based in Judaism, but it's also focuses on spiritual lessons and getting through the pandemic crisis and coping and struggling. I was very ill a couple years ago, and I think another way my search helped me was that when you know your ancestors went through triumphs and failures, in the case of my ancestors, the family was investigated by the Inquisition. When you know they went through that, then all your travails seem pretty small. And I felt like I had my family in back of me. If they could get through what they went through and still hang on to their religious faith for generations, then surely I could get through my sickness. And that comes back to the spirituality that I feel like it gave me strength.
It's interesting that you would say that. I come from a very much not a religious Jewish family, but one that identifies as Jewish. And my sister had a very painful cancer, and extremely painful. And she drew tremendous strength on the history of the people that you're talking about. What the Jewish people have been through, and the really martyrdom, if you will. And she related to it, and I was really taken with that she there was that identification with the history of the Jewish people, and a pain, and the ability to withstand it. It was quite remarkable.
Oh, just one final little thing again through this Hanani community. When I was sick a few years ago, I started in this community when we started counting the Omer from Exodus, like the 40 plus days. And each day was a spiritual lesson. And that's a precise example of how it helped me through a really trying time. It helped me when I needed it most.
One day at a time.
Yeah, fall down, get back up. That was one of the lessons. Fall down, get back up.
Amazing. Anna, your story is so different from Doreen's in that you were born into a Jewish family with a rich Jewish identification, and very much aware of this history that your family had been through. How has that affected you? You've actually gone through recently quite a fascinating journey going to Portugal.
Well, growing up, I knew my entire identity. My father is an amateur historian and a genealogist, so I heard a lot of it. And my grandfather also, he was very religious. So, between the two of them, it was a constant immersion. And my grandfather was one of 11. So our holidays, our high holy holidays were family, when the family got together, it was 75 odd people. And so there was a sense of incredible belonging. And really also my father's family had helped build Kingston. So there was a sense of ownership of Jamaica that because of that, when buildings are pointed out, oh, that was your great grandfather, that's where he lived, that's where, and it was my father, that's what he does. That's part of his whole makeup. So it was constantly places were being identified as somehow connected to the family. So to me, Jamaican and Jewish were integral to who I was. But I also was in a sense in a minority because Jamaica is a very, very Christian country. And they say it has more churches per capita than any other place on the planet. It meant I also went to Catholic school because when I was growing up, the best high school in Kingston was Catholic. In fact, all the high schools were religiously affiliated and there were no Jewish schools. Now there's a Jewish school. So for that too, and my aunts had gone there, but it meant that I was very much a minority. But it didn't matter because I was a minority of those who were established. It wasn't a minority like, let's say, the US today. So there was a real sense of in a sense, there was a sense of pride in my heritage. But what that has led to ultimately is I spent my adulthood outside of Jamaica. And so I was looking to leave the US about a few years ago when things started to shift in politics and society. And I thought, it's time for me to move on. And I looked into where I would go. I was going to go back to Jamaica and that didn't happen. That didn't work out. And I thought, where else can I go? And I remembered my father had sent me an article on the right of return, which is this new law, well, it's not new anymore, a law whereby Portugal and Spain offered Jews of Portuguese or Spanish heritage the right to return and gain citizenship. And in a sense, it was reparation, but it was also more than that. I mean, in my view, those economies were at the bottom of the Western European scale of things, and who else to boost your economy than bring back the Jews, So that's what they did. That's what they were offering. So I applied, I got accepted, and I thought I'll never go there because I'd spent 4 months in Spain in 1992 at the time of the 500th anniversary of Columbus's departure from that part of the world. And I was working there and I thought, this is not for me. I didn't like the feel of of Spain. It felt like fascism was still very much in place. And I visited Portugal, and I thought, what a run! I can't believe my ancestors were from here. I didn't want any part of it. And then when they gave me citizenship, when they accepted my citizenship application, which only came through 3.5 years later, I thought, in good faith, let me visit this country again. And I did, and I came to Portugal, and I instantly felt at home. And I thought, well, this is where I'm going to move, because my plan was actually just to go to some other European country. And I felt so at home here. And I think it's like what Joe is saying, the time was right. The time was right for people to be open and accepting of not just Jews like myself coming back, but their own Jewish heritage. Every single person I spoke to in that first year mentioned, when I told them why I was in Portugal, every single one of them spoke about their Jewish heritage. Every person I met in Portugal had Jewish heritage and knew it and spoke about it freely and openly, and very matter-of-factly, in fact. So it was a new era. This was a far cry from 1992, where I felt that I couldn't even mention it. Yeah. So anyway, that's what's brought me back here.
It's interesting. It's very interesting. It's a topic that's become rather newsworthy these days, among everything else, is the resurgence of anti-Semitism. And I'm wondering how each of you relates to what's going on and what you make of it and how you relate to it for your own safety. Doreen, do you want to start?
Well, for me, I'm in lockdown. So the curfew is at 6 or 7 o'clock right now. So I'm not moving around much. But when I lived like 30 kilometers northwest of Paris. And I used to go into Paris every day direct on the train. So for me, going in on the train, I'm not noticeable. It's more the people who are noticeably Jewish who I think face anti-Semitism. And in fact, there was a period when, I would always notice, but I would see someone wearing baseball caps instead of over their yarmulke. And it was obvious to me that they were Jewish, but they were just trying to be very low key. And I saw more of that in the last 2 years, that people were trying to be careful and low key because anti-Semitism is below the surface in some parts of Paris. But affecting me personally, it doesn't affect me personally, other than, again, when I'm doing reporting for the New York Times, even a couple of weeks ago, I did a story for them related to looted art. And, you constantly hear the stories of people from another generation who were hidden by their family at a convent, or thinking of someone younger who kind of erased her origins because it was so painful what happened to the family because they were Jewish, that they basically stopped talking about being Jewish. So I feel like I live among that, but the most overt anti-Semitism seems to be directed at people who are wearing outward signs, symbols of Judaism.
Hasidic people in particular.
Yeah, in particular, yeah.
Yeah. Anna, how about you? How does it affect you?
Well, it doesn't directly affect me because I don't really fit a stereotype. And when people, when I have what has happened though, when I've had personal interactions, when I've met people, the first thing they ask is, where are you from? And I say Jamaica, which basically negates any possibility of my being Jewish in their heads, because most people on this planet, Jamaica has Jews. Right. And then what I've been faced with in Europe in particular is anti-Semitic comments, because they feel comfortable enough around me, not realizing my identity, to then make anti-Semitic comments. And that I've encountered quite a bit. So it's disturbing because it's so ubiquitous.
Mhm.
And it's the comments, the typical comments of, oh, you know how Jews are, or don't be such a Jew, or you know how Jews are flashy, or you know how cheap, or all that the usual. And yeah, I just find it really disturbing. But
Yeah.
there's no violence that has been reported in Portugal. And I'm also on a farm, and we're in lockdown too. But when it was not so restricted, when movement wasn't restricted, there, I do know that in Lisbon, at certain sites where they have memorials, they're defaced every single day. Every day, says this tour guide I know tells me he cleans this particular monument where one of the massacres happened, which has a big Jewish star on it. Every day there's graffiti that's anti-Semitic. So, yeah.
Now, Anna, you come from such an interesting mixed background. When you see anti-Asian stuff happening or anti-Black stuff happening, how does it relate to, do you take it all in personally, or I'm just curious as how does that affect you?
I do take, because even if I can pass as something else, it's my cousins who could easily be persecuted. So, and not only that, I feel a responsibility towards my fellow human beings. I mean, I've called out in the subway in New York before, because I think it's a social responsibility to speak up and step forward for people who are being oppressed in any kind of way. And yes, it may put me in danger, but if I don't do it, who will? We all, to me, it's a collective. And if I do it, why not the person beside me, and we can form more of a voice.
Yeah.
So, and I would want people to do the same to me. So I live by do unto others as you'd have them do unto you.
Yeah, it tends to work pretty well.
Freeze?
I said it tends to work pretty well.
Hello?
Did you lost me?
I think while Joe tries to get things reset, maybe. Yeah, because I think he froze a little bit there. We've actually, Doreen and Anna, we've been having some questions come in the chat and also in the emails, and wondering if you might be willing to respond to some questions a little bit early.
Sure.
Great. Let me pull some of these up here. Let's see. Well, one of them is actually a little bit, along with this sentiment of how people experience anti-Semitism directly or indirectly. There was a question of whether you've experienced prejudice at all, whether it's anti-Semitism from outside community, or has there been any tension or prejudice even within the Jewish community? As even the film has shared, there's lots of different forms and ethnicities and traditions within Judaism, yet they're not all very well known. So have you experienced any kind of tension even within your family or other Jewish communities?
Well, I guess I would start with, I started searching for the right synagogue to go to, and I really felt like a novice in Paris when I was searching. And one of the first ones I started at is on Rue de Notre Dame. So in Paris, it's known as the Synagogue, oddly, de Notre Dame. And it's a beautiful church with a long, synagogue. It's a beautiful synagogue with a long history. And when I went inside, it was separated. The men were separated from the women were up in a balcony. And that sort of started me on another journey of finding the comfortable place, as I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't feel like it was like anyone was turning me away, but I didn't feel comfortable. And so I think because of that journey to find the right place where I could fit in, I never felt the kind of tensions of like, who are you? You're not really Jewish. My daughter ended up going on a birthright tour to Israel with a group of young people from Paris. And when I first took her to the airport, she was really anxious to join the group. And she said, I'm not going to fit in. I have a secret. I said, a secret, not that again. I have a secret. I'm not really Jewish. And I said, yes, you are. You just have to explain to the other people on the trip. And actually, the young people were incredibly curious about her background, our story. They were welcoming. When they went to the Wailing Wall, some of them were teaching her different prayers. It was an amazingly positive experience. And I know that other people have encountered that kind of tension, like, who are you coming in? How do you fit in? But in the case of these young people, they were wonderful.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
So glad that you are back. I just started with some of the questions from our audience
Right.
while you had to reset everything.
Thank you.
Anna, I wonder if you wanted to respond in any way to that question before I turn it back over to Joe.
You know, I think that we'll just continue with Joe. I can get back to it, and it's not, yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Back to you, Joe.
What was the question?
It was about any, not only anti-Semitism, but any kind of prejudice or discrimination that they may have faced, even within the Jewish community. As you had mentioned, there are many forms, traditions, ethnicities within the Jewish community, yet they're not all recognized or always honored in the same way.
Right.
And so just wondering what their experiences have been in that.
Yeah, well, me too. I mean, I grew up Jewish in a very waspy New England community, and I went to a Quaker school, and there were things that I was not allowed to participate in, after school things, and I thought that was normal. I mean, I sort of knew my place, and I knew what I was allowed to do and wasn't allowed to do. I couldn't go to their, on their ski trips. I couldn't, go to their dancing schools, and things like that. So, and I think there's also, I think there's tremendous discrimination within the Jewish community, within and without. I mean, I think there is a lot of, I think there are, well, first of all, there are numbers of Jewish communities, and so many very consciously stick to themselves, and in my opinion, otherize themselves, and don't allow participation with other people, including other kinds of Jews. And as a result, I think that enhances prejudice and discomfort. And I was sort of brought up to meet and befriend as many different kinds of people as possible, and I think it's a better way to go for society. So, one of the things that, talking about anti-Semitism, which is always worth a few minutes. Doing this film, I was thinking a lot about anti-Semitism in general, and I was wondering whether some of the anti-Semitic tropes that we're so used to, if some of them either came from or that much more reinforced by the fallout from the Inquisitions. You know, like the Jewish I was once stopped in Paris when I was a student about the Jewish international conspiracy to take over the world. And this guy told me that it was absolutely correct. You know, this was going on. And I said, are they being successful? He said, absolutely. I said, do they have a headquarters here in Paris? He said, of course they do. I said, give me the address. I said, I'm Jewish and I don't know about it and I don't want to miss out. But then, you know, and you hear about this thing, you know, from the Protocols of Zion and stuff. But then when you look at the history of the Inquisition, where the Jews were cast out from Spain and Portugal, you know, and so one cousin went to Morocco, you know, one brother goes to Izmir, you know, one goes to Italy, you know, one goes to Latin America, and they work as traders and they're selling cloth or something. Who are they going to deal with? They're going to deal with one another because they trust one another. Well, is that an international Jewish conspiracy? No, but can it be perceived as such? Apparently, yes. And these concepts about Jews, their lack of loyalty to a nation. Well, you know, if you're going to be kicked out in 20 years, how loyal are you going to be? A sneakiness. Well, if the Inquisition is coming after you, you know, are you going to be, you know, forthright about doing all your laundry on Friday and keeping and not working on Saturday? Probably not. I mean, so there's a lot of understanding there. I think these things should be looked at and talked about, and not just by the people who are the victims of such prejudice, but also by the people, you know, who hold them, and with one another to talk about it and to understand it better, I think. Let's see, what resources, Doreen, have been most helpful to you in finding your background and the background of your stories about the descendants from the Inquisition?
Well, I had maybe like 3 different strategies, but I think I made a reference to starting with what you know. My father had prepared a folder of names going back maybe 3 generations. So first thing, start with what you know. Then I started turning to older relatives. Sadly, I had not asked the questions I should have of my grandmother, my great aunt. So I urge people, if you have older relatives, talk to them. Also, interview them in a soft way if you're talking about a sensitive subject, and this was a sensitive subject. Never approach them with the question directly, like, are we Jews? Instead, I should have approached it with certain people, like, when you were growing up, you know, what did you eat when you were little? What did you do on Friday? What were your Saturdays like? You know, you build a picture of what life was like by asking about actions, and people aren't afraid to talk about it. That was a big mistake of mine that I did. The other thing that was an incredible resource, I mentioned that earlier, that like MyHeritage, Ancestry.com, Family Search, which is free through the Mormons, was an incredible resource, because in my case, I got access to all these original documents, baptisms, which give you the names of not only the parents, but godparents. I found out about, you know, a great grandfather 3 times removed who was, as they call him, hijo natural, that he was illegitimate. You know, you find out these really interesting things. So those are great resources. A lot of people do DNA testing, and Joe, I think you've done it too. And with the DNA testing, it seems to be constantly changing the makeup of your origins over time as they get more people who become part of the system. So it was helpful in telling me kind of the diaspora of, you know, where ancestors and relatives went, but it wasn't definitive for me. And then the other strategy that was really important to me was, we moved to Spain for a summer, and we spent time in this little white village in Arcos de la Frontera in the south of Spain. And part of the joy of searching your family roots is also immersing yourself in the place where they came from. So you understand the history, you understand why people don't want to talk about these things. In this town, it was a town with 5 churches, but with one with the bell tower where they used to ring the Inquisition tones when people would march through the streets for a legal proceeding. People learned to be very sensitive and quiet about what was happening there. And by living there, I started to understand why. Not only was there the history of this Inquisition, but there was the history of the Civil War. There were mass graves there from Franco's time. So it made people really careful about who they talked to, what they said. So the immersion was really important. And then finally, with the DNA testing, it takes a while, but some people start connecting with you. And I connected with distant cousins in Costa Rica. And I found another story that I didn't know about another great-great-great-grandmother who had an affair with her cousin, who was the president of Costa Rica at the time. And the DNA showed the connections between our different families. I never would have known that story if not for someone reaching out to me who connected through our DNA ties. And then I guess the last thing I would suggest is to find a way to organize what you're doing and to write it in a way that you can pass it to someone else, to other generations.
Good idea. And I also, these DNA groups, Ancestry or 23andMe, even Wiki Ancestors and things like that, they also have postings. And I must have posted something about my mother's my grandmother's family that I'd forgotten about. And someone from Israel, and we were able to trace our ancestors all the way back to the boat. I mean, we knew nothing about anybody beyond my grandparents. And somebody at the Weizmann Institute in Israel sent me my father's grandmother's family, a complete genealogy all the way back to the 1700s, back to when Jews didn't have last names. And they had all lived in Warsaw for 150 years. And I had no idea that these people existed, that they were traceable. I just assumed that, I actually could probably go to Warsaw now and learn something about them, but I had never known anything about it.
Joe,
yes.
While you're on the subject of DNA, one of the questions actually that came in is regarding this. And I wonder if you know any more about it. Yeah. This is from Tara. Thanks for this wonderful, powerful documentary. I likely have a great grandmother who left Spain during the Inquisition and settled in Poland, Ukraine. I was told by 23andMe that DNA so far cannot be used to trace because the Sephardic Jews mix so much with the locals, that you need to trace your family through family stories and recipes. Do you have any other thoughts on this, since much of this was kept a secret?
I'm hardly an expert on all of this stuff, but there's a project run by Adam Brown, spelled as it would sound, Adam, A-D-A-M, Brown, B-R-O-W-N, and it's the Avotenu project, and it's about tracing DNA. And that would be a good website to go to, Avotaynehu, I believe. And so that would be a good place to go. And then at MyHeritage, Shelley, is it My Heritage? Is that right?
Yeah.
Shelley Talale Dardashti is a genealogist that might be worth contacting, that she might get some more information from. Yeah, but you hear a lot of stuff that's contradictory, so yeah. Anna, were you going to say something?
If I may sorry, if I may pipe in on 23andMe. 23andMe, at least up until last month, didn't even have a Sephardic category. And as in my view, and I have both Sephardic and Ashkenazi because my great grandmother was Ashkenazi. In my view, 23andMe has hijacked the Jewish genes because my percentage of Jewish genes doesn't make sense for just simply my great grandmother's lineage. So in other words, they've just simply adopted anything that is sort of proven to be Jewish. So and lumped it under the Ashkenazi umbrella. Yeah. So I would suggest that to that person that she go through another DNA testing organization. And if she's already done 23andMe, she doesn't actually have to pay for the testing again. She can download her DNA.
GEDCOM? Is it a GEDCOM?
Sorry, what's that?
Is it GED.com?
No,
Family trees.
No.
No.
On 23andMe, you can download your actual data, and then you can upload it to another site for a minimal cost. And that, to me, is the way to go if you really want to try to trace Sephardic DNA.
I think the largest database, correct me if I'm wrong, if you guys know, the largest database for Jewish DNA is at Family Tree DNA or ftdna.com. I think they have the largest Jewish database.
That's my donkey, sorry.
Great.
And Joseph Maldonado is confirming, Joe, you are correct as far as the database.
Hi, Joe. So, yeah, I mean, I must say that doing this film and having these talks has been so fascinating to me. I've just learned so much, and it's really forced me to look at the world differently. I wish I had known this information when I was 13, as opposed to really getting most of it from 60 on. I think I would have traveled differently. I think I would have met people differently. I think I would have read differently. I think I would have been open that much more to the world as it really is. I mean, when you go through Latin America, and according to what we know, like 25 to 50% of the people of Latin America carry Jewish DNA. 25 to 50% of the early colonists were recently converted from Jewish families. I mean, like within a generation. And it's really fascinating. And like in Carlos's story is so interesting, where the family was so religious Catholically, yet they carried on all of the Jewish rituals at home, including circumcising all their sons until today, and following kosher dietary laws and everything like that, including some funeral rites. But they had lost all connection to Judaism itself, and they just thought it was just the way that the kind of Catholic that they were. It's really, really fascinating. And one day we were at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York City, at the Holocaust Museum there, and we were there for a very early morning meeting. Hilary Steinman, who produced the film with me, and I, and we were leaving at about 9, and the museum was filled with school kids, New York City public school kids. There were about 5 busloads. And it turned out they were all Latino neighborhoods. And as these kids went in to learn about the Holocaust, we were thinking how much more relevant this would be to them if they were aware of of how the New World was formed and how many people of Jewish background had come to the New World and it would have been that much more to relate to, and there would just be these cross currents of identity and of understanding and of curiosity. And it's really too bad that people don't have an opportunity to talk about these things enough.
And I wonder if I might ask a question that was posed by Crystal Infante regarding identity and ethnicity. So this is relevant to that. She says, this film was very eye-opening and powerful. Thank you for speaking today. My question is, how do you identify yourself as a mixed person? I am a mixed Hispanic, and I feel like it's very hard to communicate with others since I'm not 100% a certain ethnicity.
Well, I felt that, I long felt that with blonde hair and the name Carvajal, and my family's all from Costa Rica on my father's side. And I mean, I remember feeling that way when I would go to like the Hispanic Journalist Conference and people would look at my name tag like, well, what are you doing here? Like I didn't quite belong, that I always was an outsider. And oddly, after I started to know about my own origins and where we came from and how generations survive by trying to fit in, but also by keeping their distance, I felt like I had just inherited that ability. I fit in, but I always kept my distance. And maybe that's why, maybe that made me a better journalist, because I kept my distance. I was always on the outside looking in. And that's how I dealt with it. I've never fit in.
But I think so many people, regardless of what their racial or religious or ethnic background or the stew of which they come from, so many people feel like outsiders. I can tell you a number of very prominent journalists that I've worked with that seem like they have it totally together and would certainly command any room that they would walk into, have said to me, and these are extremely well-known people, how much they feel like outsiders and how much they never feel like they fit into a room. And I think it's part of the human condition. And I think when you're of mixed race or mixed ethnicity, you can there are more reasons that you can put your finger on. But I think so many people feel that way anyway. But it is real. I mean, my mother's oldest sister married a Catholic Sicilian in the early 1900s, and he converted and to Judaism. They had another. I think they eloped, and then he converted, and they had another ceremony. And I was one day playing with my cousins, and these were actually the children of my cousins. And after they had left, I was with another aunt, and I said, "Gee, they're such wonderful kids. I wish we saw more of them." And she said, "I know, they're just lovely boys." We were about 10, I guess. She said, "They're such lovely boys. I mean, they're almost like family." And I was shocked that she, even at that age, that she had said such a thing. But I realized that my aunt, having married someone who wasn't Jewish, even though he had converted, had set her and her children aside. And it's biblical. It's like, it's like the story of Ishmael. I mean, it's really, it's terrible. but it exists, and I think it exists in every world. I think it exists in every world, and I think it's, it behooves each of us to do everything that we can to talk about it and support people who feel oppressed by it, because it stinks.
I think I just want to add that historically, in a way, coming from a mixed background helps build strength. Many conversos became some of the most creative artists and writers of their time in Spain, because living with a mixed dual identity, in some cases a secret identity, forced people to become more creative. Velázquez is an artist, for example, who tried to hide his Jewish background as he rose in the court of the king. Arguably, it made him more creative. Don Quixote, the book was written by a converso. There are references within the book that kind of wink at conversal activities and approaches. So in a way, it builds strength and openness.
Yeah. And I think that also, if you feel yourself the outsider, you become perhaps that much more of the observer, and gives you that much more perspective and that much more of a willingness to take stock of what's going on, and I think it's an extraordinary privilege in reality. I think it's an extraordinary privilege. Anna?
I'd like to add as a mixed race person, also as a Jamaican living close to 30 years in the US, and my accent never changing, not because I suppose I could have tried to change it, but who I was really part of my Jamaican identity, was very much something I felt very deeply connected to. But what I wanted to say to that person is I struggled for years trying to find my tribe, so to speak, in New York. And I have very, very close friends I've left there. But for the most part, my professional life was thwarted because of my accent and my multi-ethnicity. I'm a jewelry designer, amongst other things. And when I showed my collection, if a store owner liked it and was ready to buy into the collection, once she, for the most part, there were she's, met me and heard my accent, and she automatically stepped back, because the hierarchy in the US she didn't want to be embracing what she considered a Hispanic designer in her high-end shop, or someone who didn't, in terms of the hierarchy. When they thought I was French, it was not a problem. But the minute that they heard that I was from the Caribbean, then automatically I went down on the rungs. In Portugal, I don't feel that. I don't sense that, but it helps because my last name is Portuguese. And I also, to the Portuguese, look Portuguese. They don't see that I have Asian and Black blood in me, because so many people here on the Mediterranean, this coast, are mixed. They have a lot of Arab blood, which I do too, which my DNA tells me. So it's, in a sense, what I am encouraging that person to do is step outside of what she knows and travel and find a new community if she needs to. I mean, my family's been in Jamaica for 400 plus years, and Jamaica to me was everything. It was my entire essence, and it was very tough to make the decision to not go back. But I am really deeply happy here, and I feel so much like I belong, and I'm creating a group, a set of friends who are intellectually, spiritually, socially my equals, and they're from all over the world. And I think that's where the world is heading, and it's becoming much more so in other words, what I'm trying to say to her is instead of feeling badly about where you are, find a place that you feel good.
Right.
Don't wait for the change to happen where you are, because the change never happened. A lot of Jews remained in Spain and Portugal, and they got murdered. A lot of Jews remained in Western Europe during the Holocaust, and they got murdered. Don't wait around. If things are not working, we are nomadic by our own heritage as human beings. Pick up and go. Figure it out and go. Find where you belong.
And you know, I think this is actually the topic of identity, ethnicity, religion, our self-proclaimed identity and communal identity and acceptance is a really huge topic that I think could be a program in and of itself, because I'm actually getting messages on my phone as well, and comments and questions. And unfortunately, we are coming to the close of our program, which I'm like, oh, now everything's coming in, right? There's been questions that have gone unanswered. But I do want to give you some time for any closing words or last question that you wanted to pose, Joe, and of course, Doreen and Anna.
I just wanted to answer some things that came in earlier. I think we've answered the online research archives. Somebody, Mr. Abrams asked about a list of Sephardic last names. A number of these are published. However, some people, will tell you that any Spanish name that ends in EZ is a Sephardic name. Well, that is an actual fact, from what I understand, is that any Spanish speaking country's phone book is filled with any name could be a Sephardic last name. So there's just been so much taking on of identity that it's hard to tell. But of course, there are certain families like Carvajal, Abravanel, and things like that, where people are, you have a really good idea of where you're from. The ratio of Sephardic synagogues to Ashkenazi, I have no idea. And someone asked, how can they contribute to funding our outreach? If you go to info at childrenoftheinquisition.com, you can let us know that you're interested in all of everything is 100% tax deductible. But we've been having if you're talking about further conversations, we've had them on intergenerational trauma with psychoanalysts from Holocaust backgrounds, talking about how about epigenetics and the lineage of trauma, and how that might be working in the situation of the Converso families. We've had them about identity and DNA. We've had them on history, on why don't we know this history? And we're particularly interested in having more conferences and discussions, small or large, with an interfaith and interethnic and interracial participation. I think it's really, really, really important. There's so much for everyone to learn. But I thank you so much for inviting the film and our panel and our friends. And we'd love to do it again anytime. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joe, Doreen, Anna. Oh my goodness, I only wish we had more time. And don't worry, we put also, Joe, your contact information and the website into the chat box so that everyone has that. And we'll also be sending out that information along with the link to where the recording is going to be posted, as well as a survey so you can give us feedback on the program. That'll be sent to everyone on the call today. But thank you so much for joining us, and a special thank you to the Orlando Museum of Art for making this happen and helping us pull all of this together. Please, of course.
If people have friends or family that might be interested in a program like this, either through their community organization or their school or their synagogue or house of worship, please get in touch with us. We have a very active outreach going on, and we'd be happy to put something together. We love these intimate discussions because it allows people to talk and to ask questions and share ideas. And please feel free to contact us on the website for any personal questions that you might have.
intimate, and thanks to Zoom International. So
Yeah.
thank you all for being here. If anyone is interested in any of our other upcoming programs, please feel free to visit the Holocaust Center's website. Our next program is a commemoration of Yom HaShoah on April 8th at 6 p.m. So thank you again. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to email us directly, and we will see you soon. Have a wonderful afternoon, morning, wherever you are in the world. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.